Welcome everybody to this this evening's special event. I want to welcome all of you, especially our students who are here. In fact, I have arrayed before me student leaders from all of the 5 schools of the university. So we're very honored to have you all here. Today is indeed a special occasion for us. My name is Tom Wren. I am the interim dean of the Jepson School, and the Jepson School prides itself on the role it plays in advancing the discourse on leadership. And today we have a unique opportunity to hear from and interact with one of our most prominent leaders, the Governor of Virginia. The theme of today's session is entitled, A Year of Leadership, Moving Virginia Forward. And in it, we hope to have a dialogue with Governor Kaine about the insights into leadership he has gained in his first year in office, and of course, throughout a long career in public service. The format of the program will be as follows. The governor has a very limited time to be with us today, so he will be departing promptly at the end of the session. So I will very briefly introduce the governor. He will make a few remarks, and then we will join together up here in the chairs up front here, and I will ask a few questions of him depending on how much time we have, and then make sure we have time at the end to open it to questions from the audience. So I would like to thank a Jepson graduate, Maurice Henderson, who just came in with us, who now works as Governor's Deputy Press Secretary, who was instrumental in allowing us to have the governor today. I'd like to further note that another Jepson alum, Jocelyn Bissett, works in the governor's office as well. She is in the office of the Secretary of Administration. So we're proud of both of our Jepson alums. Now I'd like to briefly introduce our honored guest. It does not need a lengthy introduction. Raised in Missouri, Tim Kaine attended the University of Missouri and Harvard Law School. He practiced law in Richmond for 17 years and was notably successful in representing individuals denied fair access to housing because of race or disability. He has a long career in public service. He served 4 terms as a Richmond City Council member, and in the last 2 terms he was also Richmond's mayor. While he was mayor, I might add, he was the leader in residence at the Jepson School, so he is no stranger to the Jepson School. He was elected as Lieutenant Governor of Virginia in 2001 and as the 70th Governor of Virginia in 2005. He presides over a state about which Governing Magazine has said, and the editor of Governing Magazine, I might add, is a adjunct faculty at the Jepson School and is here tonight. But at one point, Governing Magazine said, and I quote, "There is little that Virginia does not do well in government management," end quote. So as good a reputation as it has, though, I think at the same time it is fair to say that the current realities in Virginia pose serious leadership challenges. So to help us think through these leadership challenges and the lessons and experiences of his first year in office, I hope you will join me in welcoming the Honorable Timothy M. Kaine. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Well, thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Tom, for that nice introduction and the chance to just come and spend an hour or so with you tonight. I'm thrilled to be back because I have some very strong ties here at the university. Tom mentioned that I was a leader in residence at the Jepson School and I was mayor of Richmond, but I've got a few other ties as well. I had one of the 2 public debates for lieutenant governor when I was running against Jay Katzen in 2001 was here, either in this room or another large room in the first floor of the Jepson School. I taught legal ethics at the law school next door for 6 years, from 1988 to 1993, and my brother-in-law, Woody Holton, is a faculty member in the history department here at UR. So I feel very, very welcome here on this campus, and I really am anxious about the chance just to share a few thoughts with you and then especially answer your questions. A year in leadership. Let me just kind of wade right into it. I am a leader, as I kind of reflected upon it, in 3 ways. There are 3 roles that I have. Where I've been challenged and had a great time in my first 10 months as governor. And those roles are first as the chief executive of the state And that is probably about 60 or 70% of what I do, although much of what a chief executive does is not necessarily the newsworthy part of the job, but it's the biggest part of the job. The second part of the job, 20 or 30% of my time, is interaction with the legislature, being part of the legislative process. And then there's about 10% of my time, which is I'm a leader of my political party, the Democratic Party in Virginia. And so in each of those areas, in sort of my profession, now apart from neighborhood and church and family, we're talking just profession, I have these three roles. Chief executive, a leader in a legislative process to make laws and budgets, and then a political leader. The most important part of the job is the executive leadership. We are a large state, 7.5 million people, 134 cities and counties, nearly 100,000, probably more than that now, state employees in numerous departments touching virtually every aspect of the life of the Commonwealth. And day to day, I spend an awful lot of time trying to make sure that we provide services in a good way. Governing Magazine, as mentioned in 2005, when Governor Warner was governor and I was lieutenant governor, ranked Virginia the best managed state in America. That's in the rear view. I want to look into the windshield. I want to get better. I'm not interested in so much in accolades from the past. But a lot of what I do day to day is working with state agencies to try to make sure we offer services in innovative ways. I'm happy that we were deemed best managed state. The Center for Digital Government earlier this year named Virginia the second best state in terms of its interface with citizens via digital technology, the way we use technology to interface with citizens. Forbes magazine in August of this year named Virginia the most business-friendly state in the United States in terms of the business climate we established through regulation, taxes, quality of life, workforce. And so as an executive, I work very hard to try to make sure we continue that kind of a track record. I give kind of a leadership speech to my cabinet secretaries and agency heads, and they get very bored because they hear me saying this over and over again. When it comes to management and leadership, all my training is really the School of Hard Knocks. I never had a management or leadership course, and so it's been through being the managing director of a law firm and a mayor, and then bringing that and watching good leaders. My father-in-law, Linwood Holton, who was a wonderful governor of the Commonwealth, Mark Warner, longtime friend, leaders in other capacities, nonprofit institutions that I've worked with over the years. My leadership philosophy that I try to bring to bear in this executive capacity is a fairly simple one. Success in a big institution is a function of two things, goals plus relationships. And that is kind of my basic management philosophy, that you begin with goals, and you have to begin with goals because well-meaning people working really hard are able to accomplish some things, but not near as much as they can accomplish if they first decide what their goals are. You have to establish goals for a variety of reasons. One, to orient and focus where you are going. Two, if you don't set very clear goals, you have a hard time communicating to others, both internally and externally with the public, what the mission is. Goals, once you set them very clearly, help you find resources of talent and even dollars that you wouldn't know you had you not set them. But goals is where it begins. And so much of the first year in office, I've worked with my agencies and cabinet secretaries to set clear goals. We are about to roll out, and it will probably happen before the legislative session begins, a fairly significant webpage, Virginia Performs, that will list for every agency of state government their 2 or 3 top performance goals, what they want to be measured by, what they want to be known by, where they're shooting, what their bullseye is, and where they are against that goal. So that every citizen in Virginia ought to be able to look at any agency and see what is this agency's main goals and how are they progressing toward the main goals. And I've worked with every agency on this, that each agency, and there are nearly 100, gave me their proposed goals, and I spent 6 weeks going over every single goal and giving them extensive feedback and then negotiating and arguing with them, because you've got to start with goals. I have some goals for myself, big picture. It's the agencies have their own goals, and I've worked with them. I've basically identified 4 things where I want to move the needle. I want to move the needle in terms of transportation. I'm going to say a word about that when I get into the legislative side. That has proven to be a real challenge in the first year. Some things we've done well, some things we haven't done yet that we need to do. Transportation, the particular bullseye for transportation is complicated because the needs of each different part of the state are very different. Second, I want to move the needle in healthcare in 2 particular ways. The measures, and I believe that your goals shouldn't be how hard you're trying. They got to be outcome measures. I want to improve access to health care for the many, many Virginians who don't have access either because they don't have health insurance or they don't live in regions where they can get access to health care. And I want to reduce the obesity rate among youngsters. That is a kind of a critical area where we're not doing very well. There are a lot of areas, unemployment rate, education scores, where we're doing well. Many healthcare indicators we're not. In the area of education, my general goal is to move us from competence to excellence. And a particular measure that I've really focused on is the number of third graders in Virginia schools who flunked the third grade reading exam. It had been at about 26%, which is 26,000 kids a year flunk the third grade reading exam, and then they do poorly in other subjects, not just that year on into the future. Our goal is to reduce that to less than 10,000 by the time I leave office, and that's the third goal. And the fourth goal is preservation of our wonderful, and God-given environment here in Virginia. In honor of Virginia's 400th anniversary, I've set a very particular goal, which was we're going to preserve 400,000 acres of open space during the time that I am governor. That would be kind of dramatically accelerated from any past period of time, but it's something we can do, and I'm working to do it. That is something I work to do as an executive. I don't really, there's nothing I need to ask much from the legislature for that particular goal. We have tools in place. I got to market the tools, got to really work to do it. But again, as an executive, I work on doing those things. So every agency sets goals, and I have goals for my own term in office that I want to accomplish. That's the first part of being a manager, a leader, or the executive. The second part is the relationships part, and I think in some ways that's even harder. In fact, I've said to my cabinet secretaries and agency heads, in my 4-year term, the first year is going to be about goal setting, and we're going to spend an intense amount of time on goal setting and performance measures. But then for 3 years, we're going to work on the relationship side. A leader can set a goal. There are some goals that a leader can set and just say, this is the way it's going to be, and it will be that way. Right, Dean? But most goals, you actually can't do that. A leader can set a goal and communicate it, but the achievement of the goal depends upon collaboration and teamwork. And it tends to be simpler goals that you can accomplish by fiat, but the more complex, important, and meaningful goals are the goals where you really need a lot of teamwork and relationships. And relationships mean a couple of different things. In state government, we tend to be famous for being in silos in departments, so this department is going to have their workforce development dollars and program, and another department, another cabinet secretary is going to have their workforce development program, and will they or won't they cooperate? Oftentimes people get in silos and they don't collaborate well together, and so we're trying to work to break down the kind of departmental barriers so people can collaborate. That's one form of relationships. The second form of relationship is the relationship between the state and local government. We do things all the time and basically pass bills where we're asking our local government partners to carry out responsibilities, and often that relationship isn't what it should be. Having come out of local government, I think I have the ability to help that along a little bit. And then there's the relationship between the governmental sector and the private sector. And it's very, very important. We're in a time where to be creative in meeting our executive goals, we got to engage the best and brightest, private sector companies, nonprofits, universities. The brain power of a UR, for example, is something that can really help us as we try to accomplish some of our goals. So goal setting is where it begins, but then relationships is how you implement relationships and collaboration. And as an executive, that's basically what I know about leadership. I'll say one more thing about relationships and then get to the second realm of leadership, the legislative. One of the things that you'll find as you are a leader in your own way, nonprofit organizations, workplace, neighborhood associations, maybe in politics, you'll get into different leadership realms. One of the things that's really important on the relationship side, the power of a leader just being there is really, really important. This is hard for me to get used to because, I'm not that impressed with myself. Why would anybody else be impressed if I showed up, But there is an aspect to the role of leader that being there at critical times, and it's particularly important in times of either accomplishment and success and joy, and also grief. It's really important for leaders to be there and be seen as being out and not being aloof and unconnected. I learned that when I was mayor, but even though I knew it when I got to be governor, I kind of continually relearn how important it is. Today I had an experience which was a really important one, a very sad one. I went to the funeral of a state trooper who was killed in duty on Friday. And again, there were family members and leaders. I did not know the state trooper, Robert Hill, who was killed. I knew him by reputation. There were leaders of the state police who knew Robert very, very well. There were leaders of his community who knew him very, very well. And in some ways, what could I add to that funeral service? And yet it was extremely important to the family and to the broader law enforcement community that I came and that I spoke there. And I learned that again and again, times of crisis, hurricanes, floods, times of joy, schools doing a good job on the SOLs when they didn't before, and I get a chance to go out and celebrate them. That is a very important part of leadership, that you need to be really connected with people, and maybe especially with people who aren't used to being reached out to. Every governor reaches out to the business community or kind of well-known public leaders, but reaching out to people or reaching out to regions that don't tend to see leaders a lot is an extremely important part of what leadership is. And particularly in a state like Virginia, where we call ourselves a commonwealth, that notion that we're kind of all in this together. There are an awful lot of people who feel left out or feel like they aren't part of it. And if you can spend a little bit of time reaching out to them, and you'll find this in your own leadership world, it is really, really an important part of being an executive. Second kind of leadership is leadership in the legislative sphere. That's a lesser part of what I do because, frankly, it is not my area. I'm not a legislator. And I have a great respect for the legislative prerogative, the Speaker of the House and the President Pro Tem of the Senate and the traditions of those bodies. I was the Lieutenant Governor for 4 years, kind of managing the business in a kind of a procedural way of the Senate and seeing what happened. But I was even made aware as Lieutenant Governor. I once referred to the senators as colleagues, and a Democratic senator, a friend of mine, said, you shouldn't use the word colleague because you're not a senator just because you're a lieutenant governor. So I learned early that there's a distance between the executive and the legislature, and I respect the different roles. But I do have a role in the legislature because I make proposals to them, legislative proposals and budgetary proposals, and then try to work through legislators and to convince people that, hey, this is a good idea, let's go that direction. One of the things that has been an interesting, and not a surprising part of the first year, but an interesting part is trying to do that as a Democratic governor with a Republican legislature. Both houses are Republican. I've had some real good success, I would say, pretty much in every area with the Senate, where, not surprisingly, as lieutenant governor for 4 years, I got to know everybody pretty well. I've had less success with the House of Delegates. But it's important to point out we've had a lot of successes, and we've also had areas where we weren't able to agree. The things where you do agree tend to get less attention. I think disagreement and tension gets more attention than agreement, compromise, moving forward. But this year, for example, legislatively, there hadn't been ever a requirement in Virginia law that teachers are mandated to receive teacher evaluations. We got that put into law in a bipartisan way. That's a very, basic, important thing. I was surprised that wasn't a part of Virginia law. We eliminated the estate tax in Virginia, which is something about which there's a lot of controversy and disagreements about that, but something I deeply believe that death shouldn't be a taxable event. And I also believe that from a competitive standpoint, it really helps Virginia to be one of the 25 states that doesn't have an estate tax versus those that do. That had been an issue that had stymied the legislature for many, many years. We reached an accord and were able to do it. We solved a very thorny issue dealing with a tax credit for people who protect open space, one of the goals that I talked about earlier. There were some significant disagreements about it. We worked it out. And there are a whole series of other things, from some Medicaid reforms to other areas as well, where we found agreement. The area where agreement was very difficult was in transportation. 3 areas of transportation are really important. How accountable are we as a system? Do we use existing dollars the best way possible? Second area, do we make the right land use decisions? In those 2 areas, actually, we did agree on a lot. Senate, governor, House of Delegates. We agreed on quite a few things in those areas. But the third area, how do we fund the need for transportation improvements, we deadlocked on. And we didn't come up with anything meaningful after a very long session and then after a special session. Part of being a leader is you tried very hard to find compromise, but also there are points at which you have to know where you won't compromise. And knowing where those balances are, what is the line of things that you can give away and compromise on, what are core principles you want to hold to. Those are very challenging issues. And I really loved working with the legislature as lieutenant governor, and even on the days when things aren't going my way, as governor, I feel a kind of deep respect and admiration for the system that we have. I lived in a military dictatorship for a while. I worked in Honduras as a missionary at a time when the military ran the country. Nobody could vote for anything, and nobody had a democratic say in anything. And that experience made me a powerful believer in the system we have, even on the days when I'm not getting my way. 10% of what I do then is be a party leader. I'm very proud of my party, the Democratic Party. I love working in a nonpartisan or bipartisan way. Democrats don't have a monopoly on virtue or intelligence, and so there's always good ideas that you can find from independents and Republicans. But I'm proud of my party. I like being a Democrat because the Democratic Party in my lifetime, this hasn't always been the case, but in my lifetime has been a big tent party. And I think that's the genius of our government and of our American experiment, that kind of all are created equal and everybody's welcome, and I love that about my party. But my father-in-law was a Republican governor from 1970 to 74. He's my political role model. And so I recognize that while being a champion for my party, I need to try to reach out and also find common cause with Republicans and increasingly independents, because Virginia, I would say, really is an independent state. Nobody registers as a party member. People might have leanings, but in some ways, we're a very independent state, and I think recent elections have shown it. So part of what I do, that last 10%, is as a leader of my party, is right now, I guess I'm the, until Senator Webb is installed, I'm the only statewide elected official who is a Democrat right now. And so I have some obligation, which I take very seriously, to try to encourage people to get active in politics, good people to run for office and to stand, and then help them be successful. And that can be a little bit of a challenge. Obviously, that puts me in conflict with those who are trying to do the same thing on the Republican side. At the same time, I'm trying to find common ground and compromise. I'm also the leader in a very competitive two-party system, trying to get my confreres elected and other people maybe not elected. And so that can be a point of tension. But again, I embrace it because I deeply believe in the system we have. Again, having lived in a place where nobody could vote for anybody, a military dictatorship, the notion of a strong two-party system where there are two competitive parties and no party can take anybody for granted because it is truly competitive, strikes me as just a wonderful form of government, even if the competitions of the day can, sometimes lead to bruised feelings along the way. I feel like I learn every day. There's never a day go by where I feel like I did it 100% right. I'm always very aware of the fact that I can learn things today and get better at it tomorrow. But I'll conclude and then answer some questions just to say I'm really proud of where Virginia is and of my little role in helping us get there. We are where we are today because of an awful lot of hard work by a lot of people over a long period of time. I've played my role as a mayor, moving Richmond from a city where we were, one of the lowest rated cities in so many areas to we were one of Forbes' 10 most business-friendly cities, and we made dramatic accomplishments in cutting crime and increasing educational outcomes. And now I'm playing my part to keep Virginia as a Commonwealth very strong. We have one of the lowest unemployment rates in the United States. Our K-12 educational system is ranked as one of the best in the United States. Our higher ed system, both public and private, is really a model in a lot of different ways. I won't go into that completely, but somebody may want to ask a question about it. I'll go into it more. I just returned from a trade mission overseas in Europe, and it was interesting to hear European businesses' perception of Virginia and the Virginia economic climate. Sometimes you kind of get out of your, own rut and hear what others say. And the combination of a Dulles Airport and a Port of Virginia that connect us to a global economy give us a global reach, along with our proximity to both the DC and the Port of Hampton roads. They give us a global reach that a lot of states don't have. And so we've got a lot of things going well. We do have significant challenges. Transportation is huge. Trying to take a good educational system but make it even better because the global competition is so tough. That is huge. We got a lot of challenges. But it's always been the case about Virginia, and it continues to be, that we've got a really deep talent pool. And we don't have a single challenge that we can't tackle with the talent pool we have available. And so I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to serve. The first 10 months have flown by, and I'm anxious, to just stay at the work. And I look forward to answering your questions and hopefully shedding a little bit of light on subjects that you care deeply about. Thanks very much.
very astute remarks, and they lead to many possible questions. My goal here, this is part of the session where I ask a question or two, try to explore some of the leadership implications of what you said and what you've done over the past 10 months. I'll try to, this is one of the times when Dean can do what he wants, so I'll take the prerogative of asking the first question and maybe slip in the second if we have time. I want to make sure we have plenty of time for questions from the audience. So the first question I'd like to do, what I'd like to do, a lot of our Jefferson students that are here are used to the faculty using case studies and trying things you can apply, the things
Sure.
you're talking to. So I'd like to use the transportation issue as kind of a leadership case study.
Sure.
I guess I'll just restrict myself to one question, but then let me put it this way. I think the best way to get at it is to have a quote from a newspaper. This is from the Roanoke Times. I think the representative is here tonight, from August 1st, and the statement is this. Most Virginians want the General Assembly to do something for the state's transportation problems, but oppose tax or fee increases, according to a statewide poll. And somewhere else in that poll, they also said they didn't want you to be borrowing from any other project to pay for transportation things. So I guess the leadership issue I want to pursue a little bit is the idea of immediate self-interest like lower taxes versus longer-term public interests like things like transportation. I can give a couple other quick examples and then ask you to just reflect upon them. One is the governor not too long ago campaigned on a platform of reducing or eliminating the car tax, which was, for those non-Virginians, was a heavy tax, and was elected, of course, on that platform and proceeded to at least partially do this, but at the cost to some localities on their revenues. And then I think, and I may be misquoting a little bit, Governor, but when you responded to the President in his State of the Union address, you were conciliatory, but at one point you said that his policies of reducing taxes and increasing spending seemed to be reckless, I think was the term. So I guess it's a trade-off. You can't have it both ways. And as a governor and as a leader, how do we address these kind of issues?
Well, that's a great case study and a good, very fundamental issue, because this is probably, in the last 10 years, has been the most fundamental issue, or kind of the core issue in Virginia politics, which is, is tax a four-letter word? When I was mayor and city councilman here, we reduced the real estate property tax rate. We reduced business license taxes. We created tax incentives for the rehabilitation of structures. I love finding strategic ways to reduce taxes, particularly if taxes are anti-competitive, if we're higher than a neighboring jurisdiction or a neighboring state. I was thrilled this year to play a key role in getting rid of the estate tax. We did a significant reform on the sales tax for technology businesses so that they wouldn't be disadvantaged at being in Virginia rather than Maryland, for example. We did a sales tax holiday. You're going to see me do some other things with respect to the tax code that will suggest, reducing taxes can be a very good thing. But I don't think it's a rigid ideological principle that you should always reduce taxes. It's got to be a balance, and you have to find out what the needs are. Every year, a group that is objective and nonpartisan, the Tax Foundation in Washington, ranks states' tax burdens, and they rank them 1 to 50. And Virginia last year was number 41, and that's traditionally where we are. We're about 41st in the nation in the amount of taxes that individuals pay as a percentage of state income. I don't think there's any virtue to being 43rd or 45th or 50th. I like being in the bottom, half or the bottom 10, but I don't want to do that at the expense of services that people need. And so in the area of state tax policy, in 2004, many of you remember, we went in and did a significant revision of the budget, and we increased the tobacco tax, the sales tax, and recordation taxes for property transfers to increase the general fund so that we could fund education, public safety, and healthcare. At that time, we knew that a day of reckoning would come because we weren't dealing with the other budget. There's sort of two budgets in Virginia, general fund budget and transportation budget, and we didn't deal with transportation. And so going around and doing town hall meetings around the state and campaigning, I became very, much of the belief that we've got a transportation challenge, road, rail, public transit, that we've got to fund it, and that the right way to fund it is to ask the users of the system to pay taxes or user fees to fund improvements. But there are those who feel very strongly that we should never raise taxes. A sizable number of the members of the House of Delegates have signed pledges that they would never increase taxes. No matter what the emergency, no matter what the need, they would never increase. And so that is a pretty significant challenge. When someone has signed an oath saying they will never increase taxes no matter what the need, it's kind of hard to find common ground. There are some areas of common ground that we can find. For example, there is generally a consensus that if we have surpluses, if we have more money than we expect, those monies can go toward transportation. You don't want to spend a surplus on expanding a program. You might not have a surplus next year and you have to cut the program. But if you can use it to construct a road or add some rail lines, that's a good way to use surplus dollars. So there is a consensus there. There's also a consensus that some of the revenues that we're getting now into the general fund really are for transportation, or they were intended originally for transportation. We should earmark them back over into the transportation side. But at the end of the day, this transportation issue on the dollar side is going to just come down to two different philosophies. One is, should we find new revenues from transportation users to pay for improvements, or two, should we take money out of existing general fund priorities to pay for transportation? And that is a very fundamental principle with me. Apart from surpluses, I don't think we should be taking money out of healthcare, education, public safety to fund transportation. And so that is a source of some real challenge as we look to find the solutions going forward. I hope that I'll be able to convince some more legislators, and I don't have to convince many more, some more legislators that the right way to fund transportation is to find taxes and fees to do it that are specifically assessed not against the general public but against those who use the system. One last thing, because Dean, you mentioned polls. Polls are interesting, and a lot of what you do in politics is look at them and try to figure out what they mean. Here's what Virginians feel about transportation. They know it's a huge problem. They know it costs money. And they want the legislature and the governor to do something about it. That they definitely want. But they desperately do not want to take money out of existing programs. They don't want to borrow money for it. They don't want to pay taxes for it. And they may be willing sometimes to pay tolls for a new road. But what about all the existing roads that we have? So there's some schizophrenia in polls. And the way I look at that schizophrenia is basically this. People elect us to do a job and they want us to do it. They're not thrilled about any of the alternatives. And they're not necessarily going to come and volunteer and sign up to pay more money. But they do want us to solve the problem. When we solved the problem in the 2004 budget about the sales tax, we got very few complaints about it. People seemed to like the fact that we were funding core services like education. We were seemed to be the best managed state, and we had a good state. And I have a feeling if we get to the point where we make decision and we do fund transportation infrastructure, we won't get a lot of complaints about that either. But we have to work to make it happen.
Reserving the right to sneak in another question if there's
Fair
time.
enough.
I think we should open it to the audience to see if there are questions.
And please tell me your name when you're asking a question.
Jonathan Nichols.
Hey, Jonathan.
How do you reconcile the differences in your personal morality, personal beliefs,
Yeah, great
with your
question.
political beliefs without risking undermining the public's perception of your political integrity?
Sure. Well, I'm not actually that worried about the public's perception of my political integrity. I'm worried about my integrity. Because you can do a lot of things in this life, and I've done a lot of things that are not very popular, but I don't really care whether they're popular or not. It's are they principled? And so, but it's a great question. How do you have individual personal principles and have a role as a public servant in a system of laws, and how do you balance those things out? And some of the issues where this tends to come up very significantly are some of the moral issues, abortion, the death penalty. These are issues of deep importance to me as a Catholic, and not just because I'm Catholic. I very much am opposed to abortion, and I'm opposed to the death penalty. My church teaches that, and I embrace it. But those are personal opinions. What do I do as an elected official? First, there can be a little bit of a false dichotomy between what your personal view is and what you do as an elected official, because the system that we have, that I pledge allegiance to when I put my hand on a Bible and I swear to uphold the laws, is a deeply moral system. You know, we can sometimes take for granted what a wonderful thing it is morally to live in a culture where it is not the whim of the ruler that determines what happens, but a set of laws that are put on the books. Virtually everybody in office has a law or two that they don't like. And yet we all put our hand on a Bible and say we'll uphold the laws. And that is something to be thankful for, because the societies in the world where it's not based on laws or rules, but it's based on whatever the ruler wants to do, well, sometimes you get a ruler that's very benevolent, but often you get rulers in those societies that are tyrants. And so it is upon, you know, just to use the death penalty as an example, that's probably the one that's just the most direct. I don't think this culture needs the death penalty. The other nations of the world have kind of demonstrated that you don't need a death penalty to be safe, and I don't think we do either. But I put my hand on a Bible and say I'm going to uphold the laws of the Commonwealth, and that includes a death penalty law that I don't agree with. But I wouldn't run for office unless I felt like I could carry out that oath, carry out the laws, and believe in doing so that I wasn't violating my principle, but that I was upholding a system that I believe deeply in. Because the system that we have is better than the systems where the rulers just do whatever they want. So these are questions that come up every day in office, the kind of personal feelings about situations and laws. But you just try to be who you are and tell people what your positions are and explain to folks why they are. I got attacked pretty heavily in my campaign for governor because of my very professed position about the death penalty. I couldn't find anybody who'd run for office in the South in the last 25 years for a statewide office and won who'd said they thought the death penalty was wrong. So I didn't have any model to follow. But what I said was, I think it's wrong. That's my religious belief. I'm not changing my religion to win a vote or to win an election. But I can carry out the law just like anybody else can who takes an oath of office. You know, they're tough issues. They're very, very tough, and they cause you to struggle and lose sleep at night. But at the end of the day, the system we have that is a system based on laws is the best possible system, because it evades the kind of tyranny that so high a percentage of the world live under, where it's just whatever the ruler wants to do that governs. Yeah.
Good evening. My name is Terrera Akinola.
Hey,
I had two questions, but since we don't have that much time, I'll ask my favorite one. Currently, I'm taking a leadership ethics class. Is a requirement for senior leadership students. And my question to you is, a leader's morality is often magnified because you're always in a limelight. So what do you do in order to ensure that your decision making is ethical and moral? Like, how do you evaluate the morality of the decisions that come out of your office?
Well, I mean, you're exactly right in the way you preface the question. Anybody in public life, whether they're a political leader, entertainment person, a person in sports, anybody who's in the public eye, the morality or lack thereof of their decision is really magnified. And I take really seriously the notion that, I'm a humble person like everybody else, but I'm also a role model, whether I like that or not. And I try to live my life in a way that nobody, I tell people when I ask for their support politically, you may agree with me or disagree with me, but I can tell you this, I'm never going to do anything that will make you personally ashamed that you supported me. I try to live my life in a way that I can say that to people and say it with a high degree of confidence. How do you, everything every decision you make is just so wrapped up in your own moral view of the world that it's kind of hard to say how you apply morality to it. I mean, we all have different moral points of view we bring to things, and they're products of the way we were raised and our religion and the experiences we have. I spent a good bit of this afternoon after I got back from the state trooper's funeral working on budget issues. What are we going to fund? What aren't we going to fund with some of the dollars that I have available to me? And those are profoundly moral choices, and they reflect priorities. I have a particular set of priorities, and this year in particular I'm trying to focus upon healthcare needs of people, and again, often people who've kind of been a little bit left behind, trying to do things to make sure that they have access to healthcare system. Those are moral choices. About the best thing you can do, though, really to have a check on your moral decision making is to have good guidance from people close to you. You know, I mean, I'm talking to students. Who you choose to marry, who you choose to spend time with, the friends that you make, the people that you surround yourself with are probably in some way, the way you asked it, what is the best way to kind of check your own moral thinking so that you're not just inventing your own rationale and telling yourself you're great. The best way to do that is by the people that you have around you. And I think that very seriously with respect to, you know, my wife is the person I admire most in life. And if I ever worry that I have bad judgment, I remind myself that in the most important decision I ever made, I demonstrated spectacular judgment. But in hiring people to work in my office, and you're all going to have this opportunity as leaders in your own organizations to, you know, what's the team that you bring together? You've got to have people who are unafraid to look you in the eye and tell you, hey, you're going to do something really wrong here. You're going down the wrong path. A lot of leaders are insecure, and they want people around them who will tell them, hey, you're doing a great job, boy, we're all for it, even when they think otherwise. One of the best checks you can have as a leader of having people around you who will look you in the face and tell you you're about to make a big mistake here. Yeah.
You mentioned, Jason,
Hey, Jason.
you mentioned that you want to preserve 400,000 acres of land over the next 4 years, I guess. And I was just wondering if you guys have any further plans over your career regarding environmental issues or sustainability, I guess.
Sure. Well, let me just repeat the question since Jason didn't have a mic. He mentioned the 400,000 acre pledge. He said, well, what beyond that? And it is true that if you want to preserve the Virginia environment, there's a lot more than just open space preservation. So we did some significant things last year. And again, these were bipartisan. On the open space preservation on this, the best ally I have on this is the Speaker of the House. He and I disagree on transportation, a couple other things, but he is the best ally I have in the legislature on open space preservation. And there is also quite a bipartisan consensus on some other environmental issues, particularly with respect to the Chesapeake Bay. For a long time, we kind of ignored the condition of the bay, but it's gotten pretty significant and somewhat dire. And now there's a really good bipartisan consensus. Last year, we invested a lot of money in the bay, and we also put in some new regs with waste treatment plants, for example, to make sure that water cleanliness is enhanced, which keeps the bay cleaner. So those are probably the two big ones. It's the cleanliness of rivers and the bay, and then the preservation of open space that are the two biggest initiatives environmentally that I'm going to spend my limited 4-year period of time focused on.
Got a microphone here.
Hi, I'm Thad Williamson.
Thad?
Thad.
Thad.
Welcome.
Thanks.
As you know, in Richmond, there's a huge disparity of income and poverty, public school quality, and crime between the city and the surrounding counties. And also, Virginia is almost unique in the separation of city governments from county government. So my question is, how can the state government encourage regional cooperation and some really substantive redress of these imbalances?
Sure, yeah, that's a great question, Thad, and it's one that I really wrestled with, as mayor of Richmond. My kids are in the city school system here, and I've seen some of the disparities, but also some of the wonderful things that happen in city schools. Sometimes the test score might suggest there's not good education going on, but you go into the school and find that actually there is, but there are disparities. And what can the state do? I think the state can do a lot. One of the things that I'm focused on, and there's a work group that I have that's creating an urban policy for me to then kind of execute over the next few years, to carry out. One of the things that strikes me is that probably the biggest line item in state government, if you want to look at it this way, is dollars that the state takes in, and then we write checks out to local governments. So we send money to local governments for public schools and for social services and welfare to work programs and transportation and all kinds of other libraries. We take the money in and then write a check to local governments. But we very seldom create an incentive in those monies we give to local governments to regionalize. In fact, often we create disincentives to regionalize. This is an easier thing for me to do when I write a 2-year budget, which is not this year but next year. Next year will be the first time I'll have a chance to write my own 2-year biennial budget. But what I've challenged my team to do is, as we start to write that biennial budget, let's look for ways where we can give incentives. When we write these checks back to local governments, we'll give you your check plus 10% if you offer this service in a cooperative way with other cities and counties in your planning district, but we'll give it to you minus 10% if you don't. There's one area of state government where we do this now. We've been doing it for 30 years, but we've never used the model for other areas, and that's in jail construction. Jail construction is really expensive. It's probably the most expensive piece of infrastructure you build. And so 30 years ago, the legislature realized it might not be the best idea for every city and county to build their own jail. So what the state does is, if you build your own jail, the state will pay 25% of the cost of it. But if you build a regional jail with regional partners, we'll pay 50% of the cost of it. That saves everybody money by incentivizing cooperation. I think we ought to use that same strategy with respect to virtually everything we do. And so I have had discussions with my team about, let's look at ways to do this in the other service areas. Again, for technical reasons, it's kind of hard to do that in midstream budget, but when we write a second-year budget, that's the kind of thing we'll look at. And and the nice thing is, the more cooperation you encourage and incentivize, it's like the more you cooperate, the more you then realize, hey, we can benefit from cooperation. So every new thing you can do in tandem with a neighbor convinces you of its value and will want you to cooperate even more. And so that's something I really want to explore, to draw the cities closer to the surrounding suburban communities.
We have a
time
question.
for one more question, maybe one teeny one from the chair.
Oh, we're actually over here. Is that okay?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Oh. Actually, it's a big question, so she said
No,
never mind.
yeah, big question is fine.
Hi, my name is Bailey Lucian, and I'm a sophomore in the Jepson School.
Bailey.
I'm currently in a Justice and Civil Society class, and we're examining current issues where minority rights and majority opinions are conflicting.
Right.
I'd just like to ask how you see your role as the governor in lieu of the gay marriage amendment that just passed in Virginia. And I mean, it's got to be a huge conflict between serving the interests of all of your constituents when they conflict.
Sure. Oh, that's a wonderful question. Let me get on a little bit of a soapbox about the system that we have, and then I'm going to talk particularly about the marriage amendment. In many places in the world, maybe the majority of places in the world, minorities govern. Some person, because they're the head of the military, they run everything, and nobody else has a say in anything. And so that's a fairly common form of government. And I'm not talking, when I say minorities, I don't mean racial minorities, I mean numerical minority. One, despot basically will rule everything, or a military will rule everything. Better than that are societies where there is true majority rule. And yet that majority rule can still cause real problems for minorities. Majority rule established segregated schooling in the United States. Majority rule can often have a tendency to put people on the outs and exclude people. That's why we have civil rights laws, and that's what I practiced for 17 years is civil rights work. The wonderful thing about the system we have is we are a system of majority rule, but we have constitutional protections in the Bill of Rights to protect the rights of minorities, racial minorities, religious minorities. Sometimes you'll be in a minority because of your political party, but you shouldn't be excluded or forced out because of that. The one great thing about our system, and we're not perfect enough to do it perfectly every day, but the great principle is we have a system based on majority rule, but protection of minority rights, and that's a wonderful thing. I was against the marriage amendment on the ballot because I thought it really infringed upon minority rights. It took a group that is an unpopular group and kind of targeted them in a little way, and took rights away from them, which I think are really, I just thought was really at odds with who we are and the system that we have. I'm strongly pro-marriage. I've been married for 22 years last Friday, and I'm strongly pro-marriage. And I believe deeply in marriage between a man and a woman. And if that was the only thing that the amendment in particular had said, I would have supported it. I believe deeply in that institution. But I think other relationships ought to have the ability to be recognized. And the actual amendment not only defined marriage as between a man and a woman, but it said there will never be any recognition of any other kind of relationship between unmarried individuals that is designed to approximate the benefits, intents, quality, significance, and designs of marriage. And I thought that was too extreme, to look at all unmarried people and say that your relationships, if you choose not to marry, will never be recognized in any way by the Commonwealth. I just didn't feel like that should be put into the Bill of Rights. So, but I lost. I mean, I advocated that position to the public. It was put before the public. It is now in the Virginia Constitution, and I view that as an unfortunate but That's another law that I've pledged to uphold. But I'll continue to do what I can, again, with my particular background coming out of a civil rights law background, I'll continue to do what I can to at least try to remind people that it's great to live in a system that protects minorities, because we could all be minorities at one point or another. Again, maybe not racially, but maybe our party, or maybe our religion, or maybe there's some other aspect of who we are or what we do might put us either as a minority or an unpopular person or position at some time. And we want to have a society that protects that. And so I view that as a really important part of my job.
I have one last question. It's not nearly as sophisticated as our ones our students have been throwing at you.
Good questions.
But I think it's important nonetheless. We have a room full of students who are about to embark on careers in public service and private sector and those sorts of things. What kind of advice do you have?
Well, I'll tell you this. The best thing I ever did to prepare myself for a political career was completely accidental. So it was unplanned. But let me give you the benefit of my accidental good decision. And that was, I didn't do anything in politics till I was 34 years old. I never thought I would be in politics. I mean, I was a voter. I read the newspaper and I was voted. I never thought I would be in politics. I thought I would practice civil rights law and work in my church and in civic and neighborhood organizations. And then one day I got mad at my city council and I ran for office. But by the time I did that, I had been out in the world for 10 years, building up a law practice as a civil rights lawyer, working in my church, working in my neighborhood, so that by the time I went into public office, I brought a lot of life experiences with me. I do see some people getting into politics, and it's kind of all they want to do, and they don't really bring outside life experience with them, particularly in legislative bodies. And I would encourage everyone here who's at all interested to run for a school board, a city council, a legislature, Congress, governor. Elected office has many pains and challenges to it, but it's also fantastic. But you will be better at what you do if you have some kind of non-political base of knowledge, experience that you bring to it. In the legislature of Virginia, we've got veterinarians, we got lawyers, we have bankers, we have pharmacists. Up until recently, we had a tree surgeon. He retired, but I always thought that was so great. That's the great thing about a legislative body, that people bring different experiences to the table. We also have people who were somebody's legislative aide and then jumped into politics, and they don't bring so much kind of other experience to the table. So my advice to you would be, I think what you ought to do is stay really interested in public service and do that. Maybe get involved with a local party or public service thing, but try to build up an expertise and a base of life experiences and something other than politics for a few years, and get rooted in a community and in the needs of a community, so that when you then make a decision to go, for example, into elected office, you really bring something that's very uniquely yours to the table. That would be my advice.
Just thank the governor for a wonderful conversation.